Welcome back to Hot Flashes and Cool Topics. Today we are talking to author Brigid Delaney, and she has written a book called Reasons Not to Worry: How to Be Stoic in Chaotic Times. Welcome to the show, Brigid.
Thanks, Colleen. Thanks, Bridget. How are you?
Doing
We're
great, right.
we're very stoic right now, getting
We're
ready to talk to you.
really learning. I'm learning a lot from your book and really trying to put it into practice. So, yeah,
Going well for you?
but it is. It is. And
Good.
we're going to talk all about the principles, but it does, the big thing is my reaction to situations and to really take a step back and think about things has been very useful. So thank you for that, for sharing that with everyone in your
Well,
book.
let's kind of get started at the beginning. And
Yes.
can you explain what Stoicism is and how it started oh so thousands and thousands of years ago?
Sure thing. So there was a lot of philosophy schools in Greece in was around 350 AD, and they were all kind of competing. And a lot of them had quite sort of strong ideas around, you know, food or community or money. And you kind of picked the school, if you're a man, you kind of picked the school that you most resonated with, and you would go to lectures and you would learn about it, and you'd talk philosophy, and it was very interwoven in how you lived, which we've kind of lost today. And one of those philosophies was the philosophy of Stoicism, and it was founded by a guy called Zeno, and they were called the Stoics because they met under the painted porch in Athens, which was called the Stoa. So that's how they got their name. And that school flourished in Greece and then traveled over to Rome, and was very popular, particularly with the Roman elite. And it kind of faded out when Christianity emerged. But yeah, it did have a boom time, and a lot of the Roman writing has been preserved. Greek writing not so much. So my book focuses on the writing from the Roman Stoics.
Yeah, and it's when people today think of being stoic, they think they're stoic, they're very reserved, they don't speak out a lot, but that's not necessarily what that meant initially. Can you share what really being a stoic really kind of means?
Yeah, sure thing. When I was first doing the book, I told my editor that I was interested in Stoicism, and she said, "Oh, my father was very stoic. He didn't cry when my mother died." And it's like, "Oh no, that's not what it meant." I mean, it means that in the kind of more modern sense, but the Stoics, as I said, they got their name from the porch, the painted porch. They didn't have a stiff upper lip, but they didn't believe in suffering excessively. So they didn't think you should suffer if you could avoid it. And they had all sorts of tricks and tools for avoiding suffering, unnecessary suffering. And so they weren't anti emotion, but they were about not having such an excess of emotion that you then have a crash. You then come down, or you then get caught up in an emotion, sometimes for years. An example might be, um, you have a dispute with a friend, and that can occupy your brain space for so many years. You're fighting in your head, you've got this grudge, where you actually have a lot of control over your reactions, which is what the Stoics believed. You can't control a lot in life, but you can definitely control how you react. And so it was about kind of alerting people to their potential to control reactions and therefore lessen suffering. Um, and I can go into a bit about the main test, the main Stoic
Sure. Yes.
control test, which might
Mhm.
help your listeners, see the kind of simplicity and elegance of Stoicism and how it can be used today. So, um, they have this test called the control test, which is really the kind of cornerstone of Stoicism. And they believe that you can only control kind of three things in life: your actions and reactions, your own character, and how you treat other people. and everything else is out of your control. So once you kind of realize that, it's quite liberating. So um, I might go to work today, and I work in politics. I anything can happen. So I might get given some work that needs to be done very quickly. It's quite overwhelming. I can't control the work, but I can control how well I do it, how I react to being given the job, um, my mood. So yeah, we can use it in so many different situations.
Yes, and that
So,
is what I'm trying to practice right now.
um,
Yeah.
so you were saying there are three principles you can control: your character, your reactions, and how you treat others, which,
Yeah.
breaks down into the kindness that you show others. But there is so much in the world that we don't have control over, especially right now. And a lot of people, even just coming out of the pandemic, it just seems like a lot of people feel like the world and subsequently their lives are out of control. What would the Stoics say is a way to kind of feel more in control of your life?
So the Stoics, I definitely resonate with that. Like in the pandemic and coming out of it, there is a real feeling of a lack of control. There's been so much conflict in the world, so much pain, and just watching the news is a very, kind of, horrible experience. So how do we, what can we control? The Stoics would say we never had much control anyway. So things can things can get worse in the world. We can go into pandemics and have lockdowns. People we love can get sick and die. That has always been the case. Stoicism was developed in tough times. It was developed during times of plagues, wars, high rates of infant mortality. One of the main Roman Stoics was a guy called Epictetus, who was a slave for a lot of his life, so he didn't have any liberty. Um, so it's they would say, look, there's never been control. You know, um, you can only control your mind and your character and your actions and reactions. The world out there will do what it does, which is often not not necessarily to our liking, but the space that we have of control is how we move through that world, how we treat other people, and how we react. And we can choose to see that as not much control, or we can see it as a large amount of control because um we have mental autonomy. So yeah, it's all framing.
Yeah, I just like even how I think you say in the book, just how some people trying to not control, but trying to maintain that outlook within their families, within their homes, and
Mm,
that might spread to other people. And, I know you mentioned in there in times of war how people would deal with this as well. When things, like you just said, I right now personally feel like it's chaos right now, complete chaos, and trying to keep some semblance of sanity. Um, Maybe some things that are happening in this world right now are not directly affecting me personally, but when you see it happening to other people and other humans throughout the world, it is very anxiety inducing and very scary. And I feel like the book was really timely to read right now, especially in a time like that. And then see that your emotions are a product of how you think about the world. And
mm.
that's a real, gosh, I guess I'm such a emotional person. That's a tough one for me to try to
It is a
hold
tough
that.
one.
Yeah.
The toughest ones actually. And look, it's also like in the book, I do disagree with aspects of Stoicism and push back, particularly as a woman. This was written by men. I think there's a lot of connections between emotion and hormones, emotion and the unconscious, emotion and how you were brought up, emotion and your, neuropsychology. They didn't know any of this when they were writing their philosophy. They did get a lot of it right. Like it's interesting how humans you know, we think we're so different now as modern people, but fundamentally, character does stay the same over time. But look, they didn't get everything right, and with emotions, I think it's stoicism is an ideal to reach, but I definitely don't beat myself up when I have a strong emotional reaction. But I'll just explain a bit about why emotions are important to, I guess, control or observe in Stoicism, and that is because they sought to maintain this thing that they called ataraxia, which
I was
is,
just going to ask you about that.
yeah, ataraxia is fascinating. So it's not the name of a, you know, antidepressant, although I'm surprised that it hasn't been marketed as such. Ataraxia is just the kind of Greek word for relaxed, equilibrium, um, chill. And they believed that the Stoics believed that if you maintained that state as a baseline state and really strive to kind of keep yourself on an even keel, so not go too high, not go too low, when bad things happened or unexpected things happened, you wouldn't rock out of that state and overreact or suffer more than you should. So it's about keeping even. So when you're knocked off course, you can get back on it quite quickly. Um, and they believed that one thing we all have, or most of us have, is a rational mind. And that if we protect our rationality, we can make better decisions. We're less likely to have disputes with people that go out of control. I've written a lot in the last few years about the rise of anger post pandemic, but you know, it's a big thing in America, in Australia, you know, all across the world where, um, you know, there's been a long period of entitlement for a lot of people. Um, you know, there's also been anger, and the Stoics were very anti-anger, so they said it was very important to maintain that tranquil state, not to tip into anger, because you lose your rationality, you make poor decisions, and it's much harder to kind of come down off the ledge. So, how does that relate to? I guess how does that relate to, say, the geopolitical situation happening in the Middle East, where you might get angry at one group or another, or you might get anxious? The Stoics would say you don't have control over that situation. You can't control whether or not there is a ceasefire. You can go to vigils. You can, if prayer's your thing, you can pray. You can donate. But ultimately, those big things are out of your control. So there's no point getting worked up, getting angry, um, lashing out, because you'll just disturb your own tranquility and the tranquility of people around you. And so you'll actually create a warlike state or a tense, stressful state for others. And that's something you have control over.
How does ataraxia relate to the preferred indifferent doctrine, where we're supposed to be indifferent to things like wealth and health and reputation? Do they work together in Stoicism?
Absolutely. Look, I'll give you a real life example from last night, or yesterday. So I've been working on a Netflix series, Wellmania with Celeste Barber, and I just found out that it didn't get picked up for season 2. So, you know, really terrible news for me, bad news financially, terrible for the show. I'm really upset about it. Um, but I also, because I've been practicing Stoicism, I was, you know, I got the news and it hurt, but I didn't I didn't kind of go into it. I didn't spiral into a fog about, you know, I didn't get to, I was sad for a little bit and then I bounced back quite quickly, because money is there would have been quite a big payday for me. And money is a preferred indifferent, which means it's preferable to have it, but I should be indifferent to it because I can't control whether Netflix green lights the show. That's out of my hands. So if I'm holding on to money really tightly, the prospect of getting this money and I don't get it, and then suddenly I'm devastated, I'm angry, I'm fearful, I get anxiety about it, I'm then suffering twice. I've suffered once already. My show didn't get renewed. The second suffering I can actually control. Like I can control how I feel about money. So when it comes, it's great. But also you can see that it goes as well. You know, it comes, it goes, and you have to see it as not your own money. It is, you know, a thing that comes in and out. And so that is how Ataraxia has really helped me. You know, because there's going to be ups and downs throughout life. So you can't get too down when there's a down. Also, you can't get too up when there's an up. Like it works. It
Yeah.
works both ways.
And that's a tough one for me too. With the
Yeah.
ups, because you almost feel like you get a high or something when something's so exciting and just really up there. But there is a letdown. It's like people after the holidays, that little
Right.
letdown after that, you know.
Yeah.
Well,
And
Yeah.
that's also, that's the struggle with Stoicism, which is
Mm.
how do you enjoy the good things, as well as like not suffer too much from the bad things. You know, you do want to be able to celebrate, and I think you can celebrate the good things, but not get too attached to them.
Mhm.
Sounds very Buddhist.
But like possessions as well. And I do like that you think these, you can't take any of this stuff on with you when you die. You can't take any possessions with you. And how I like that part, that they look at it as something on loan to them while they're here.
But your whole life is on loan to you. Like you're
Right.
on loan to
Yeah.
the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, that's an important thing to remember for so many reasons, including enjoying life while we have it, enjoying our health while we have it. You know, when money does come, enjoying that, not getting too attached. So the Stoics weren't anti-money, they weren't anti-fun. They were just such realists. Like they just really looked life in the face. There was no sugarcoating anything. Um, and also with health, like they were very much of the view that we should look at everyone as a mortal being, every friend, every child, ourselves as people that are born to die, to quote Lana Del Rey. So and the whole point of having that death and temporariness front of mind was so that we could truly live fully, um, with the people that we're with and with the life that we've got.
you also talk in the book about, in a section called How to Be Good, about living in agreement with nature, that the Stoics talked about that we need to live in agreement with nature. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I was reflecting on that in relation to the topic of your podcast, hot flashes, which is like, you know, around menopause, and that is nature. That is nature, is the cycles the body goes through. Nature is the seasons that are outside us. Nature is human nature. There's so many circles of nature, and we find aging like it's some sort of option. There's an option not to age. Well, sorry, you know
The
that's not
option's death. Yeah. Yeah.
is not nature. Nature gives us a full spectrum of life experiences and stages, from being a very dependent child to, if we live long enough, probably being a very dependent old person. And in between, there are all these experiences and changes. And the Stoics were very big on accepting change. They said that a lot of unnecessary suffering came from resistance to change. And they said, well, change is nature. If you look outside, the environment, like I'm recording this in Australia. We're in spring. It's just popping at the moment. The colors, the vibrancy, and then the leaves will change, and then it'll change again, and it will change again, as our bodies will, as our brains will, as our the people around us will change, and that is all nature. So yeah, it's you can either go with it or resist it, and that was never a good thing according to the Stoics.
Yeah. Yeah. They also talk about the death and how you deal with death, because I know way back they lost many children. And can you
Yeah,
share a little bit about the visualization of death that they would experience?
yeah. Trigger warning.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a look. It's a really confronting thing, but Epictetus, one of the Roman Stoics, said that every time you tuck your child in and say goodnight, you should visualize them dying in the night. Um, Now that is a pretty harrowing passage to read, but it's important for a couple of reasons. One is to remind yourself that everything's on loan, as the Stoics said, like anything can be taken away by nature at any point in time. The second thing is, if your child does wake up and is alive, you've got gratitude for that life, and you have gratitude every single day. The third thing is, by reminding yourself constantly that you're mortal, you don't waste a day. You really um, enjoy every experience, even the bad ones, because you're alive. Um, and so, yeah, there's so many lessons in how they approach death, and they're real kind of the really main lesson is how to live. It's Seneca, one of the great Roman Stoics, said, "We're dying every day, so every day we are actually in the process of death." And that's a thing to remind ourselves of, as we might go about our day grumpy, wanting to get it over with, rushing through things. It could be our last day, so try and enjoy it.
In the second part of your book called Life and Its Absurdities, um, you talk about the Stoics and their belief in moderation of really all things. Can you talk
Yeah,
a little bit about that? Because I think that's a big point for a lot of people in anything you do, whether it's eating, exercise, living your life. Moderation sometimes is the suggestion for a lot of it. So, can you talk about the relationship between moderation and the Stoics?
yeah, sure. I mean, they, particularly the Romans, they had a lot of excess. And Marcus Aurelius was the Roman emperor. And Seneca was one of the wealthiest men in Europe. So they had a lot of means in which to indulge themselves. Um, and they didn't always practice moderation. I think, like all of us, we're human, we indulge. But too much excess can damage rational thinking. So think about if you've had too many drinks, what sort of decisions you make, or when you're hungover, you know, how your process, how you are with your emotions, like you're all over the shop. Think about addiction and what that does to rational thinking. Um, so all of the moderation wasn't because they had a problem with alcohol or anything. It was more like, well, what does it lead to? It leads to impairing your rational judgment, which is a gift that separates humans from animals. So yeah, so it was in service of being rational. And they also, Seneca had this funny thing where he's like, you know either say no to drinks, become a water drinker, or just have one. But then he said every now and again, get really loose, get really off your chops. because excess wine washes away troubles. So think about if you've been dumped or lost your job or you're in a funk. Sometimes one big night out with your friends can actually, you know, be the thing that turns the situation around, or just moves you out of a negative headspace. So they were so canny on human nature and how we interact with substances and yeah, so I love that advice.
It's like a reset, just if something like you
Yeah,
just
well,
said, and
yeah,
just let me do this and I will reset. And it oftentimes works, it often
yeah,
does. We had interviewed about a year ago Karen Duffy, and she had been on MTV in the United States in
She
the
was a VJ.
BJ in the
yeah,
90s. And she, underwent a really rough medical emergency or just situation, sarcoidosis. And she wrote a book called Wise Up, and she really referred to the Stoics quite a bit in that
mm,
book as well. And so, it's so interesting after reading her book and your book and thinking about her situation that she faced, just scary pain, hurting her vision, I mean, her physical mobility, and she was such a pleasant person to talk to. It
yeah,
it really was amazing to think, somebody like her that has gone through really tough stuff. Just she had a surrogate have a child for her because she wasn't able to have a child, give birth to a child. But her outlook on life is really amazing. Just such a
mm,
pleasant, friendly person. And it just sounds really wonderful what what stoicism can bring to someone. And I just felt like that was such a good example. Um,
for
so
sure.
could you share how you kind of went into this, the story of how you came into this with your friend and came about with this book?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't have anything it's my story is not particularly dramatic, and I think in a way stoicism is really helpful to learn before, like before you go in to a before you hit a crunchy point in life. Of course, we never know when that's going to happen. It's really good to learn a philosophy or to have some sort of set of principles that can get you through grief, that can get you through um, pain. And I'm just before I answer your question, I'm going to give you an example. Have you heard of James Stockdale? He was a US presidential candidate, I think, back in the 80s.
Oh, I
But
don't remember.
James
Yeah.
Stockdale. Hmm.
he was in
Stockdale. Mm-mm.
well, he's fascinating. He was in the army. He was in I think it was the Korean War. It could have been the Vietnam War. It was in the Vietnam War. And before he was a fighter pilot, he went to university after the Korean War, and learnt philosophy. And particularly Epictetus, the former slave that I was telling you about. And he was fascinated with Epictetus, thought he was really interesting, but it was all a bit abstract. And then he went off to fight in Vietnam, for America, and his plane was shot down over enemy territory. He was captured. All his men were captured as well, and they were put in a very brutal prisoner of war camp. And as he was shot down and floating down to earth, he said, now I'm leaving the world of technology and entering the world of Epictetus. So he realized that he would have to lean very hard on his stoicism for what was coming next for him, which was many years of imprisonment in this camp. And he ran his group of men in the camp according to the principles of Stoicism. And I think they all survived. And he won many medals afterwards. He was tortured. He was beaten up. He had, a lot of didn't know from one day to the next whether he would live. And he managed to survive that experience using Stoicism because he couldn't control his environment, but he could control how he thought about his environment. So he's written this book called Courage Under Fire, which is tiny. It's a lecture that's been turned into a book. And I encourage, it's on the internet, it's free. I encourage you all to have a look at it, to see how Stoicism can be used in an extreme situation. So I haven't faced that, but I was learning Stoicism. I was in Sydney, Australia, having a really kind of great, great life, living by the beach. And then the virus happened, and I realized, oh, this thing I've been studying about control and about character, it's really going to come in handy now. And it did. And I was studying it with a friend, Andrew, and he was a bit more advanced than me. He was actually probably more naturally stoic. And in lockdown, we took a lot of long walks around the beaches, and we discussed stoicism and how it would apply to our lives. So everything from being unsuccessful, I was unsuccessful in getting a pay rise at one point, very angry about that. So we talked about, well, can I control my boss giving me more money? Probably not. To things like government orders that forbade people from leaving their homes for more than 1 hour a day exercise, to not being allowed back into the workplace, to fear about the virus. So we would walk and talk and apply the Stoicism almost like it was a medicine, and found it was so useful, and it worked pretty much in every circumstance that we threw at it. And that's how the book came out, was, writing about these walks, writing about my own life, working out where Stoicism kind of fitted and where it was a bit too masculine or a little bit too rigid. So, yeah, the book is my own journey in Stoicism, but also like how you can apply it practically to everything in your own life. And then when the big things do happen, you have something to fall back on, because there's a real lack of, I guess, people, growing up in a religious tradition, practicing religion, having that set of guardrails or principles to get them through all sorts of situations. So, yeah, and the book's been really popular with young people who really want some sort of guidance, particularly ancient guidance that has been tried and tested.
Well, along those lines, I think you do talk in the book about social media and how to be on social media, and how, if you are someone, number one, I love that you say you don't have to have an opinion on everything. Not
Yeah.
everything has to be built on your opinion. And second, if there is something that may hurt your feelings or a negative response, instead of going right to a judgment on the value of it, to kind of research, okay, is this person even educated on what I'm talking about? Should I feel sorry that they're not? Like, can you talk about how to kind of flip the switch so that someone doesn't take to heart when they're getting negative comments on social media?
Yeah, sure. So I had a really widely read column in the Guardian that attracted a lot of attention. Much of it was negative, people saying that it was a very light-hearted column, but people would say, "Oh, stupid, this stupid woman. Um, she's ridiculous, and she's so annoying." And so firstly, I tried not to see those things, because I didn't want it to ruin my ataraxia, my equilibrium. So but I also decided that if I made that decision not to see those negative things, I also had to screen out the positive things, because you don't want to give yourself a false picture that that everyone's just going around saying great things about you. So I made the decision very deliberately to not engage with either good or bad feedback, unless it was in a professional sense from an editor and it was, you know, related to my actual work. So I adjusted my settings on social media so I didn't see a lot of stuff. And when I did see stuff, sometimes people would screenshot terrible things that people had written about me and send them to me, and I'd be like, why are you doing this? But when I did see negative things, which I occasionally did, I just thought, well, you don't know me, you've never met me. If you knew me very intimately and you had an opinion on my character, it would hit a lot deeper than some, Ray 47 X at, so it didn't actually disturb me that much. And I think people can lose vast amounts of time in these intractable social media wars where they get angry, they waste a lot of time, they go back and forth. It's never resolved. No one ever wins. And you're just getting more and more angry. So, people are wising up to things like the algorithm rewarding negative emotion, rewarding anger. And the Stoics would say, you have the option of opting out. They would have been on Twitter or X or whatever it's called. They're very social beings, or they were very social beings. So they would have definitely had some engagement in the commons. However, that aspect of social media, of pylons, shaming people, even virtue signaling, all that stuff, they just would have rolled their eyes and said, that's ridiculous. So yeah, that's how I kind of deal with social media.
And I know as we get older, and especially, I notice since I've gone through menopause, that's one gift. Things actually roll off of me better than they did when I was younger. And I do feel so much for younger people though, where they grew up with this. But I think this is a great example to show them, Stoicism is a great example that could be helpful for them.
I think so as well. I mean, with younger people in social media, it's come into their lives, and it's come in without any sense of being taught how to use it properly. And so I very much feel for people who are coming of age in a place where they are, attacked for how they look. Of course, as you get older, you look back at photos of yourself when you're younger and think, I was beautiful. Like, what's,
Mm-hmm.
But this amplifies this thing of not being beautiful enough, not having enough followers. Yeah, it's terrible. But, the solution's not necessarily to ban these things, but to talk about, okay, well, what are the settings that you've got? Who's able to comment on stuff? Do you need people to comment? Maybe you just turn the comments off. Put a nice photo of yourself enjoying life. But also, I think being aware, like the Stoics say, you can't control what other people think and how they react. But I think we do need to be aware of posting images that create a situation of envy or that might provoke in other people a feeling of lack. So I think there's got to be a bit of, responsible posting.
Yes.
It's just so interesting how you have related Stoicism to modern day, because it really can apply. And, when people say you can't change a situation, you can only change how you react to it. It really does apply to almost every aspect of your life. So thank you so much for coming on this show, Brigid. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Brigid.
Yes.
I've loved this chat, and it's Stoicism is a bit like religion. You've got to keep going back to the books. You've got to keep going back to the practice. So conversations like this actually make me more stoic. So I'll go into my day a bit more chilled. So thank you so much.
Well, and I need
so
it
will
as
we.
well. So will we. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And again, the book is Reasons Not to Worry: How to Be Stoic in Chaotic Times. Thank you.